everyone, it has been a minute since I've posted a watercolor tutorial. Been a little busy, but I'm super happy to be back to posting on my YouTube channel, and I love to hear that my videos are helping you guys. So today we're going to be painting these watercolor Polaroids. They're super fun. I love these so much. They're a fun way to remember your travels, a fun way to get into your sketchbook. They're really easy, as you'll see. I think they're easy, but it's totally a beginner-friendly tutorial. I'm going to walk you through all of the steps, and let's get started. For this project, we are going to need some supplies, of course. The supplies that you'll need are watercolor paper. I like to work on a watercolor block. I love arches. Any watercolor paper is fine though. Just make sure it's at least 140 pounds, so 300 GSM. Anything less than that is not going to soak up the water the way that it needs to be soaked up for watercolor artwork. And you can also work on single sheet. If you are using a single sheet, just make sure to tape it down. That way it doesn't buckle, because we're going to be using a good amount of water today. We are going to need some brushes. You do not need all of these. I just pulled them as examples. But anything from a 6 to a 2, I would say probably I'm going to be using this size 3 brush. A size 4, a size 2 is fine, even a size 6. So you just need one of those larger brushes. They're not that big, but in this case, they are compared to the other one we're going to use. And then the other one for you to use is something that's smaller, like a details brush, maybe a size 1, maybe a 2/0, just something for details. We are going to need washi tape. This is going to help us get this Polaroid look by just protecting the paper so that there's no watercolor artwork over here. You're going to need a ruler, a pencil. I like to use 2 water cups. That way my cool tones stay cool and my warm tones stay warm, and we get very vibrant colors. And then of course, watercolors. I have an enormous watercolor palette now. I just switched to this recently. I thought it was going to be too big, but I honestly love it so much. We are going to be using a variety of colors. When I tell you the color, I'm going to use general terms like pink and blues or greens, and you can use whatever colors make sense to you. I'm not going to tell you the specific colors just because you don't need to buy the exact colors I have. Of course, if you have a question about the colors that I use, I'm happy to answer it, but just a watercolor palette you don't need all of these colors, but the general colors like reds and blues and greens and yellows. Now in the next section, we are going to set up our watercolor paper so we can start painting. Now that we've got all our supplies, we need to set up our watercolor paper to have these little Polaroids. The way that we are going to set these up is we need to leave some space around here so that when we pull our washi tape off, we'll have this really beautiful, perfect little square. You can make them any size you want, but I am going to be making them sizes 3 inches by 3 inches. If you're working on a piece of watercolor paper and it's just a single paper and you've taped it down, just make sure that you account for that space. If you've taped it down, most likely you already have the perfect amount of space up here. If you're working on a block, then follow me. I'm gonna come over just a little bit on this edge, and then I've come down just a tiny bit on my paper, and I'm just gonna draw a really light line. I'm going to go 3 inches in, then I'm going to take a inch space and then go 3 more inches. This space in the middle is going to be where these connect and where you can cut and trim. And I'm just going to follow suit. I'm just making this really light, and I'm making a perfect 3-inch square. If you don't feel like drawing it on here, you can just put little dots, because we're gonna put washi tape here. So I'm actually gonna do that on this other one. I'm just gonna put a little dot here and a little dot here that tells me where the tape is gonna go. That way you don't have this. Most likely this pencil line won't show up, but just in case it does. Now I'm grabbing my washi tape. I haven't used this in a while. Okay, I've grabbed my washi tape and I am just going to outline this entire thing. Think of this washi tape as the protection that's going to keep your watercolor inside. Make sure you press it down nicely. I like to use washi tape because it comes off of the paper really easily. Again, just make sure that you're pressing down. That way you're sealing that edge. And if you don't want to do little teeny ones, you can just go all the way across too. That's fine. I didn't make this long enough, so I'm gonna have to do an extra piece. I'm actually going to take this off and put it over here. Then over here. Yes, so you want to use something like washi tape because it's going to be nice to your paper, or painter's tape, but you don't want to use regular tape or you're going to be so upset because it's going to rip up your paper. And then in the middle here, it's going to be a little bit thicker than our washi tape, but I'm just going to put another piece on this side so that these stay nice and even. Of course, they don't have to be nice and even. I personally really like the look of them being exactly the same. I think they look super cute if you want to put them in your office or like decorate with them and stuff. Okay, now we're gonna go all the way across. Okay. I usually like to use plain washi tape because I think it can be a little bit distracting, but it's whatever you have is totally fine. All right, now that we have our washi tape all set up, when we cut these out, we can leave a bigger space down here, like a Polaroid has. And this is actually really cute practice to do if you love to travel, and you can do little scenes from your travels. And then down here, you can put where you went, what year it was. It's just a fun way to remember your travels, but you can make these for anything. That's why I love them. Now we are gonna sketch out these two scenes. The first one we're gonna start with is our little vineyard scene. And let me just put this back here because it's sticking really bad. We are going to lightly sketch our vineyard scene. I'm gonna start off with the hill in front, just coming up like this. Very, very simple. I'm making my lines a little bit darker because I want you guys to be able to see them, but you do not have to make it this dark. You can make it as light as possible. And then on this side, again, just a little hill. There's going to be these 3 round bushes. I'm just making little like half C's. You don't have to draw these in, but I like to draw them in just to make things easier. And then over here we have, I think they're called cypress trees. They're really tall. They're very indicative of Tuscany. So we're gonna do a couple of those. All right, and that is all the detail that I'm gonna put in here because actually, you know what? I'm gonna do the lines here. So the vineyard, just do lines kind of following each other. It'll just give you a little bit of help when you start painting the vineyards. And then on the other mountain, they're going the opposite way. And they get tighter the further away you go. All right. For our second one, our little lagoon scene, draw a horizon line right, I would say just right below the center line. And we're gonna do this little river coming through, kind of snake it around, and then just follow this side but on the other side. And have it connect up here. Same thing, we have these bushes, kind of round little blobs. Okay. And that is all the details that you're going to need. So now that we have this laid out and sketched, we are going to start painting in the next section. The first thing we want to start painting is the background, and we can paint all the way up to this horizon line here. Grab your water And I like to just brush some water on here. We're gonna start with the vineyard one. You never want there to be puddles of water. You just want it to have a shine, if you guys can see that. If you see puddles, spread them out, or you can rinse off, dry off your brush, and then you can actually pull up water too. But we don't want any blobs. We just want a nice sheen here. And you can make this a sunset, a sunrise, whatever you want. I am going to grab a little bit of purple and start off the top with purple. Kind of like a purpley lavender. Since it's already wet, it's going to bleed really nicely. Then I'm gonna rinse off my brush and grab a brighter blue. And this is really fun to kind of just see what happens with your watercolor. Then I'm going to get a yellow, pretty bright yellow, and touch around this horizon line with my paintbrush. Rinse off my brush, and then kind of help it move up. Now you want to be careful here because when you're mixing yellow with blue, it's going to turn green. So I have made sure that I came up right to this line. There might be a little mixing, but if I started bringing that yellow into the blue, it would be really green. I want this to be a little more brighter, and I think I'm gonna grab some pink. I have Opera Rose here, and just kind of tap it in a little bit. And I might put some of that down here as well. Be careful not to overwork it. That is something that you'll learn over time with watercolor. Overworking it can kind of creep up on you. Okay, the last thing I'm gonna do is just, I'm lightly tapping in some orange, but I wanna be careful that it doesn't start getting murky. Okay, that's it. I'm gonna let that dry, and I'm gonna move on to this other one right here. This is another reason I like to do two at the same time, is while I'm waiting for this one to dry, I can work on this one. And you could even do three, because we are gonna have to wait a little bit, because I don't think this is gonna be dry by the time we start this one. Now, for this one, we wanna reflect the sky in the water, and how we're gonna do that is we are going to paint this all at the same time. So you're gonna need a blue. We have a little bit of yellow here, a little bit of pink. Again, we're starting with just water. We are painting with water to the horizon line, making sure that we don't have any puddles. Okay, I've reached my horizon line. Now I'm going to paint, you might need a smaller brush for this, just the water. And again, this is just water, and we are painting the water. Very meta. Okay. I'm gonna grab just a smaller brush. I'm gonna move to my size 4. Now grab your blue, whatever color blue you want, and just lightly paint it over the top here, and leave a space of white or clear, or whatever you want to say here. And you can always add, I feel like I just want it to be a little more saturated at the top. Then I'm going to reflect the same thing down here. That blue, I can see that my washi tape is not all the way down, so I'm probably gonna have a little mess there, but that's okay. So lightly painting with blue, we are gonna leave a big white space right here with no paint. And it's gonna bleed a little bit because it's wet, which is good, we want it to do that. Then I'm going to switch to my yellow. And be sure not to mix it with the blue. So I'm just coming down here And I'm gonna do that same thing down here. And the water reflection is usually a little bit lighter than what the sky looks like. Then I'm going to rinse off my brush, and the last color I'm gonna get is pink. I'm just dabbing right here, almost like the sun is rising, and then just the little top of the river or stream, whatever it is, which can bleed a little bit into the yellow. And if you feel like you have any harsh lines, just grab water on your brush, lightly dab it, and you can just lightly move it around a little bit. I feel like this is a little harsh right here. So I'm going to be careful not to make it green. See, I got green over there, but that's okay. And then if you want to add any more colors, I think I might just saturate this blue a tiny bit more. One thing with watercolor is over time you'll learn, once it starts to dry, don't touch it. I'm not there yet, but you'll notice if you add more paint and it starts pulling up the paint, that means that it's starting to dry, and that's the point of no return. You want to just stop and let it dry, and then you can come back and put another layer if you want to. Okay, now I know this might look funky right now that there's this big open spot with no color, but I promise you it'll make sense. Since these are both still wet, we don't want to come in and start adding color here, because if we start adding the green, it's going to bleed into the yellow, and then it's going to look like we have a green sunrise. Same thing over here. So we're just going to give it a second to dry. So let your watercolor art dry, and then we'll come back and we'll add the other details. Okay, we are back. And these should be pretty dry. Mine are almost dry. I think I'm gonna be safe down here, but just make sure they're dry. I don't want you to rush this and then it bleeds into itself. We're gonna start off with our vineyard on the left, and we're gonna start off with the very lightest color. I just wanna show this as a reference. So we're starting off with the very lightest color, as you can see, this really light green background, and then we're gonna build layers on top of that. This will help give it depth when we look at it. So mix up a color that is a very light green. Whatever that means to you. This watercolor palette is a little cumbersome when it comes to teaching, I will say that. Okay, now that you have that, you're just gonna put a light wash over this on both sides. So this whole mountain here. I could probably use a slightly larger brush for this, but remember this is your lightest color. I can see that my yellow is not completely dry yet. I'm just gonna be really careful here. Okay, there we go. Again, I know this might be annoying, but we're gonna let this dry a little bit. If we go in right now and try to add stuff in, it's gonna bleed too much. We don't mind if it bleeds a little, but we don't want it to bleed a ton. We're gonna come over here, and I'm going to mix up a color that has a little more green in it to do these side banks here. Or, sorry, that was misleading. A little more vibrant green for that one. Maybe add a little blue. So this is what I'm working with here. Then we are going to paint those here. Just all the way up to this horizon line here. And you want to use a brush that has a nice tip so you can get around these edges. Same thing on the other side. We're using the same green. Be careful you're not using too much water. We never want to have puddles on our paper. If that's happening, just lightly tap your brush on a paper towel. I don't know if I said in the supplies to have a paper towel because it's just second nature to me. I always have it, but make sure you have a paper towel. It really, really helps. I use the same paper towel for like months. Okay. All right. Now, while this is still wet, we are going to paint our trees up here, and I'm gonna add a little brown into my green. Not too much, just a little bit. And you can get a smaller brush if you like. I'm gonna stick with this size 3 because the tip is so good, but I just like to tap because you wanna have a little bit of a jagged edge. Now my background is still a little bit wet and I'm getting a little bit of bleeding, which I'm fine with because it's actually giving it that jagged edge that I like. Don't worry that these look exactly the same right now, the color. We're gonna pop in some other color, but we are just lightly putting down this little base layer here. Now, while these are still wet, I'm going to mix up a darker color. So I have a little bit darker color here. And you don't want it to be super, super watery. You definitely want this to have some saturation to it. And just with the tip of my brush, I am going to lightly dab at the bottom of all of these trees. Almost like you're reinforcing that horizon line. Same thing on the other side. If you have a good amount of water, which I do on this side, it's bleeding a lot more. You can also help it go up the tree a little bit. We don't want it just to be a flat line. And you can also take a more medium tone, or maybe you want to add in a little more yellow or a little more brown, just something different from all of the colors that you currently have on here. And lightly, that was darker than I wanted, but tap in that. Basically, you're just trying to create some depth. And if you feel that you want to remove some of the color, you can lightly rinse off your brush with water, dab it off on your paper towel, and then you can just press and it'll pick up some of the color. We can add a little more details when they're dry too. And then something else that we want to do is we want to add finer details around here, and it's okay that this is wet still. You're going to grab a pretty dark color of green for these little shadows on the bank, and a small brush. I'm working with a 2/0, very small details brush. You can use a 1. If you have a really good tip on your brush, you can use that. And I am just putting the tiniest line right on that bank. Because this is still wet, it's gonna bleed a little bit. And same thing over here. I'm just using light tapping motions. I might have to use a little heavier hand. There we go. Do the same thing over here. This side is a lot more wet, so it's bleeding a lot more. But I kind of like that. It looks like grass coming out. Just these really simple techniques can really add so much to your artwork. And now can you kind of see how this looks like a beautiful reflection? It didn't really look like anything special when we started, but now that we're kind of adding in this stuff, you don't want to, every single bank, you don't want to add this shadow because then it'll just look all the same. So you can see here, I didn't add the shadow there, but I do have it here. And then of course here, and let it come up it's pretty wet right here. It's not giving me exactly what I want, but that's okay. And something else cool you can do is the same color that you're using, but really, really, really water it down. Then you want to leave a space between this bank and where the water edge touches it, just the tiniest little space here. So you don't touch it. Just draw or paint a little line, then rinse off your brush. And I just have water on my brush and I'm going to lightly move that around. So I have this little green shadow. It looks like a reflection in the water. I'm only gonna do that on one side. I'll do over here too. And you want it to look like it's dissipating. So adding water can help it move a little bit better. Okay. Finer details, we're gonna need this to dry, because if we wanted to add maybe an even darker shadow here, right now all it's gonna do is bleed and we don't really want that. We also have these little cattails in the front that we wanna add. I wanna add some more detail up here, but at this point we need to let this dry, otherwise it's just gonna all blend and bleed together. Now that we need this one to dry, we can move over to our vineyard and we can start adding in some detail. Mine is not 100% dry, but it's dry enough for me to start doing, adding the vineyard in. We're gonna grab a color that is darker, not our darkest color, but darker than what's currently in this background color. And what I'm going to do is where the line is, right above the line, I'm just going to lightly tap in some color. You can see that mine is bleeding quite a bit. My test rate here is that a little bit of this light color is staying untouched by the color that's bleeding in. If that's not happening for you and it's just all bleeding in and you can't see any of the light color, then just stop and wait for it to dry a little bit more. I'm just lightly tapping in a lighter color. And I'm following that line. This is the top of the vineyard. So if you were looking down at this, this would be the top. I probably would have let this dry just a tiny bit more because it is bleeding pretty bad, but that's okay. And then we will do the other side as well. Okay. While that dries, now we really need this to dry because we need to be able to put more details that stay put. But since our background is dry here, we can start working on these trees. I'm going to use a greenish yellow with a little bit of brown for those round bushes. And the same thing we did over here. I'm just kind of tapping, because when I tap, I'm able to get the little curvature in the bush or tree. I guess this would be a tree. And same technique we used over here, grabbing a color that is slightly darker. I'm just gonna poke it in at the bottom. And we start to get some shadows and the tree starts to have a little more depth to it. Since these are far away, we don't need to do a ton of details. Basically, we just want our eye to register that it's a tree and that it has varying levels of shadows from far away. A great practice is to look at things that are far away or squint your eyes and you'll see just kind of the bare minimum of the light and dark shadows. And that'll help you understand when you're painting kind of how to, it's almost like an optical illusion. You're tricking somebody to see something that is actually not there. That might be really like high level, I don't know. Watercolor is pretty amazing because sometimes when I'm looking at a watercolor painting that somebody else did and I really break it down, I realize they're not painting something 100% realistic, every small detail. They just have been able to capture the most important details and bring them forth, and our eye kind of fills in the rest and our brain fills in the rest, which is so cool. Now for these cypress looking trees, they're a little bit darker. We're gonna start off with our lighter dark color. Oh, that's really dark. Okay, we don't want it that dark. There we go. And I kind of just use brush strokes with these ones. I want them to have little pointy edges. So I'm just using the tip of my brush to get those pointy edges. I love explaining watercolor like that because I think when people are like, I really want to be a really good watercolor artist, they get really focused on capturing every small detail that they see. Because I mean, I fell into this trap so bad too, but actually that's not really what you need to do. You need to understand what the most important details are. Now this guy needs to dry significantly before we start working on it, but we can come back over here and fill in some darker details because I think we're good over here. I am grabbing a darker shadow of green because I want to come in here and just add some little shadows. As you can see, it's still bleeding because it's still dry. It's still not dry, but it's okay if it bleeds a little bit because these are far away and they kind of need that look. We don't want perfectly detailed things because they're far away. I'm just tapping in color at the bottom because there would definitely be a shadow at the bottom, and then maybe a couple towards the top too. Actually, this is like the perfect consistency right now, the wetness of the paper. And then again, just lightly tapping. There's something really soothing too about letting the watercolor bleed and kind of work for you. It's really cool. Okay. And if you want, you could add in yellow. I think yellow might be really cool since we have this sunrise kind of happening. You could add yellow right here. It almost looks like the sun is peeking through the trees. Lots of options there. I might add a little bit more. I would like to add just some more darker shadows down here. And to do that, I am mixing up an even darker green, maybe with a little blue in it or a little brown. And then with my very small details brush, just gonna make the smallest line right here. And do the same thing over here and here. And it almost doesn't connect to the line. It definitely doesn't connect here, but I'm saying when I'm drawing it here or painting it here, it doesn't connect. Now we want to do our little cattails, and those are really fun and just wispy. I'm using my 2/0 and just like this, and I'm gonna put a little cattail. And then you can press down and then pull up to make the little leaves. And don't make them all in the same direction because that wouldn't make sense. Give them a little whimsy. And this can be pretty dark. You could honestly use black here if you wanted to. I'm gonna darken it a little bit with a dark brown. But these should be significantly dark because there would be more shadows over here. Just really light or like thin brush strokes. And then make sure things are going lots of different ways. Nature is pretty organized and repetitive. But when it comes to little wispy things like this, they can go all over the place. Okay. We have that. Then if you want to, you can come in and that darker shade that you were using, you can add a little bit of that on the horizon line too. Not too much, but okay. This one is basically done. We just need to wait for it to dry so that we can pull up our washi tape. And now we can come back to our vineyard over here. And this, I think, is dry enough. This one's taken longer to dry. We're going to mix up a green, a darker green than what we have on here. And we are going to tap in. Okay guys, I can see that this still is not dry enough. So we can come up to these trees and work on the trees. The cypress trees need a darker color. Mix up a darker green. To make your green darker, you can add blue, you can add a little bit of dark brown. I like to stay away from adding black because I think black just mutes the colors. And the cypress trees have some, like, kind of these wispy branches that go up. Since we're further away, you're not gonna see every little detail, but I wanna show some of that. So I'm just going to add some little lines going up. But make sure you leave some of the background color. This is pretty wet. And when I say background color, I mean that lightest color that you originally put on them. This is pretty wet, so you might have to wait for yours to dry. And then I like to do just little branches kind of coming off up here. There we go. I am gonna have to come in and do a darker color because it was so wet, it's bleeding. Then we can come over to our trees and we're gonna do the same thing we did on the other side. Just adding in a darker color at the bottom to show shadow. In order not to keep coming back to this when it's super wet, we're just gonna let this dry. We're gonna come back and then we can finish it Okay, we are back. This is finally dry, I hope. And we could start doing some of these finer details on here. I am going back to that darker green color. Not super dark, this is like our medium green. And we're just gonna tap in on this little line. Okay, I'm just using the tip of my brush, and make sure you are leaving a little space underneath so that lightest color is underneath. And we get tighter and tighter the further away we get. Basically what we're trying to create here is the depth of the vineyard. The lightest color showing through is actually not the ground, it's the top of the vineyard. I know that's kind of weird to think about, but by using various shades of green, it'll just kind of help draw your eye in. I'm just almost like making little dots. There's texture here in the vineyard. The vines. Okay. These don't have to be perfect. Just getting color on here. You can also add more yellow to this if you feel like you want that. Totally good. I'm looking at it thinking it's kind of a little bland, so I might add a little more yellow in. Okay. Make sure you get all those lines, and then I'm going to come in with my smaller details brush, and I'm mixing up a darker green. This will be our darkest value green that we're using. And right under each one of these lines, I'm just going to lightly tap in the darker value. Now, if you're finding that yours is just bleeding all over the place into that green and you're not getting any of the color variations, then wait a little bit. I think I might have to do that. Yeah, I'm gonna have to wait a second because mine's doing that. We're just having issues over here today with this. I swear to you, every day is different based on the humidity levels. I have all the windows closed right now in my house and the humidity is higher. It's been really dry and usually things are drying a lot quicker. So that's why I'm just so confused. We're gonna let this be for a second and let it dry. We're gonna come over here and we're gonna do that same thing. And we're using that same mid-green tone. And where the line is, we're just lightly tapping, just kind of making some texture here. To show the vineyard. And I'm actually gonna put one down here too, where the hills kind of cross each other. You might live in an area that has a ton of moisture right now. Maybe you're in Hawaii or somewhere tropical. It's gonna take a lot longer for your paper to dry than if you're living somewhere like the desert or super hot, dry climate. Okay, I'm gonna leave these and let them dry a little bit, but these guys are dry now and we can come in and add those better details. Our greens, as you can see, really just blended all together. We are going to mix up another dark green, our darkest green for these little cypress trees. And I'm just doing light lines. I have my smallest detail brush. And you can see a little bit of the green. The lighter green is showing through. That's what you want. Just that little bit of texture. These are, like I said before, these are so fun to do when you are traveling on vacation. We're about to take a trip soon and I'm really excited because I'm gonna definitely do this. I should have done it for Scotland, but I didn't know about it back then. Have to go again. Same dark green, and I'm gonna add a little something over here to these trees. They're looking a little sad. Just want them to have a little more depth. A little more depth. Okay. Our last time, we have to be patient. We're gonna wait for these vines to dry and then we can come in and add the darker color. All right, let's add in our final details. Get that dark green color again and your little details brush. I have to mix up. Something that I recommend doing is if you are working with a tiny brush, don't mix your colors with your tiny brush. You will ruin the tip of the brush. I actually keep a brush that I don't care about that much, this one, and I use it just for mixing colors sometimes. You can use the brush that you're using, but if I'm using detail brushes, I do not mix with those because you will just destroy them. Save your detail brushes. Brushes are not cheap. Okay, get your darkest shade of green. Bring back your detail brush. And we're gonna start at the top and just putting in, I'm using that same kind of dotting motion and just adding darker shade to the bottom. Essentially what's happening here, and I can see that one's still wet, but skip around. Don't just make a flat line all the way across with the dark because that's boring. What I mean is, take a little break here, take a little break here, just more depth. But basically what we're doing is this is the bottom of the vineyard or the vine where the shadow would be. It's just creating depth and making your eye kind of tricking your eye into thinking that these are vineyard lines. Much better now that this is not so wet. And you could take this a step further if you want. You could have gone for a shade that was in between the medium one and then this darker one that we're using. You could totally do that too. You could add a little more yellow into your leaves if you want. Lots of options. You want to make sure you're still following the line though, because if you've ever looked at a picture of vineyards, they set them up really, I mean, it's pretty amazing, but they're these straight lines or curved lines if they're on a hill, but you want to make sure that you're still kind of following that. Otherwise, it's not going to make sense what it is. We're going to do the same thing over here. And then just where the hill kind of crosses over, make that a little darker. And sometimes the hill that's in the back, I like to just do a light wash over it so it looks a little darker. Now you can't do this until this is more dry, otherwise everything's just gonna kind of bleed together. But that way it looks a little bit behind. Okay, now that these are done, what I would caution you to do is wait 100% until these are dry before you pull off the washi tape. But I think mine are gonna be fine, especially this one because it's already dry. When you pull off the washi tape, just pull at an angle. My dad taught me this, he's a painting contractor, and I swear to you, it helps. Washi tape is pretty safe, but if you're using something like painter's tape, definitely pull at an angle. And we are going to just take these off. Amazing. And now I don't want to waste this piece of paper, so I'm just going to tell you what to do. I know you're very capable of figuring this part out. What you're going to do is cut these out and then just make sure to leave a little space down here. I have about an inch of space that I leave for the Polaroid, and you just nicely trim them. And then they are these adorable little Polaroids that you can give as gifts. You can keep them in your, maybe a scrapbook that you have for a vacation, or I mean, you can use them as decorations. So many options. Thank you so much for painting along with me today.